I'm Dan Steers, one half of Double Dan Horsemanship. It's an introduction to Liberty demonstration. So I'm going to go through and demonstrate what Dan and I do to start our Liberty team or introduce Liberty to our own horses, as well as what we teach in our clinics as well. It's, to me, a really important foundation to put on your horse as far as a partnership is concerned, to start developing, working with your horse on the ground and then progressing to under saddle. So Liberty gives me that opportunity to get my horse working willingly for me, like I said, on the ground firstly before developing it under saddle, and then just getting the partnership that we all want with our horse, where, you know, the horse is wanting to do the same things that we want him to do, whether it is Liberty on the ground or ridden under saddles. Our lead ropes are a little bit shorter. They're 10 foot rather than maybe a 12 or a 14 foot line that you might be used to using if you've done some natural horsemanship before. The main reason why we have our lead ropes just a little bit shorter is because our Liberty is driven from our whips, not our lead rope. So if you've been a part of those other programs before, you might have then used the tail of the lead rope to drive your horse. Dan and I don't do this. We're sort of trying to get past using the lead rope as sort of quickly as possible. So if we're using it to drive and then we disconnect the lead rope to start working on our Liberty, then we're going to have to use another tools. The other, I guess, main difference in our lead rope is our connection knot. So the connection knot is instead of using a clip, again, Dan and I, this is something we both really agreed on early on in our program, is we didn't like the feel that the heavier clips gave us when it comes to communicating to our horse. We always felt like we had a dead weight literally on the end of our lead rope and we couldn't feel the horse. And for us, it didn't make a lot of sense when we're thinking about riding our horse and putting a bit in, that if you were to put two big heavy clips on the end of those reins, you wouldn't be able to feel the horse's mouth or his connection to the bit. But when it comes to our Liberty, there's the two longer whips here. The black one is a Lunge Whip. I'll use both a black and a white Lunge Whip. The reason why we might use white is visually the horse can see it better. All right, black's fine when I'm doing groundwork, you know, particularly in the halter and lead, because if he doesn't quite see it, I can adjust using the halter and help and support the horse when he might misunderstand or missee the whip aid. But at Liberty, the white one stands out a lot better. So for Dan and I performing, we would use two white whips just to make sure that we can be confident that our horse is going to see the whips. So that's the black is the Lunge Whip. The white here that I'm using, and I thought I'd keep them two different colors so I can talk about it as I work with Tiger Lily, which whip is communicating to the horse at the time that we're using them. The white one is what we call a driving whip. So it's a little bit shorter than the black Lunge Whip, not by much, but it's significantly shorter in the tail. So what this means is I can work my horse relatively close or at a medium distance, I would say, and I can still use it to create a little bit of drive behind the drive line. But if the horse comes in close, he's not going to step on the tail of that whip like he may do if I was using this Lunge Whip. So if I'm using the Lunge Whip, and now you can imagine it's getting a little bit too close, maybe to Tiger Lily's back feet, she sort of steps on the end of that whip and it might pull it out of my hand and obviously become ineffective. So that's when I'd be looking at using my white whip. But then if my horse gets out on a greater distance, then I might lose the drive power of my driving whip if I get in front of the drive line, which, if we're going to look and talk about that briefly, essentially the drive line is anything behind the eye. I remember getting taught pretty early on in some horsemanship classes where the instructor would put a rope around the horse's neck and then indicate to us anything behind that rope, you're behind the drive line, and anything in front of that rope, you're in front of the drive line. But since I've worked with a lot of horses and worked not only horses but even cattle, the drive line to me is the eye. So if I'm behind the eye, I'm behind the drive line. It's just the greater the distance behind the eye that I am, or the more angle behind the eye that I'm position myself or my driving tool, the more drive I'll have. So I want to make sure that my whip is always coming behind that drive line. So if I'm in front of my horse and maybe I'm using my white whip to try to get my horse to come forward, that's going to block that horse and it's not going to give me that response that I want, where I can then use my Lunge Whip and use the tail to stay behind that drive line. So that's why I'd use that longer whip. I wish I could make it simple and just say that we only needed to use one whip, but we do like using both the driving whip and the lunge whip, just depending on what we're asking our horse at any one time. So the big thing that we've got to look at before we take that halter and lead off is the horse is confident to come forward to the whip first and foremost, and also his balance to the whip. And what I mean balance to the whip is that if I have my whip on the right, what I want to see, if I'm overlooking the horse's tail, it goes horse me whip. If I'm to flick my whip across to my left, the horse would change, so it would be again my whip in my left hand, me, and then the horse on the right. That's what I'm talking about, balance. So the horse never stands between me and the whip. It always has myself in between the whip and the horse. So that's really, really important to teach. And then what I just mentioned previously, which was coming forward to that whip pressure. We get a lot of people in our clinics say, oh Dan, don't use the whip on my horse. You know, he's frightened of the whip. I think he's been, you know, mistreated with the whip previously. And that might be the case, maybe, but some horses just are nervous of the whip. You start waving it around or you're not using it correctly. The horse gets a bit of a fright, and then you take the whip away and you confirm that behavior. So now you pick up the whip, and every time he sees it, he gets a fright, and the horse doesn't respond how we would like him to. So this part here, the introduction to how we use the whip, will stop that from happening, as well as even if the horse has had some history with the whip, if you use it correctly, you don't have to necessarily desensitize the horse with the whip. Just by the horse understanding how to respond to the whip is how he'll get confident and become relaxed with the whip. So that's what we're going to show you here a little bit as well.